When I settled in to watch the flood of content that was streaming out of D&D headquarters, I gotta admit I wasn't expecting a whole bunch of spoilers that we hadn't already seen in the UA. That the surprise rules were a surprise was pretty fitting, don't you think? Essentially, the surprise rules are changing so that instead of having this weird round that we didn't want to call a surprise round, but that was basically a surprise round where some people got to act and other people didn't, the surprise condition now just imposes disadvantage on initiative checks instead of making it so that you don't get to act during a surprise round. And this has a lot of stuff that it is going to change in our games of D&D, which is awesome. First and foremost, this is going to interact with abilities that have already been put into the game that give advantage on initiative, so that people like the barbarian that used to be able to rage in order to participate in a surprise round now get to participate in that they get to roll initiative as normal, even though they might have failed on whatever perception check or the like was required in order for them not to be surprised. I also feel like this is going to have a strong influence in balancing our game in a different manner. Previously, surprise was essentially a I win button for most player character groups, at least at my tables. I run 6-person tables, and so our party has a lot of oomph in a single turn, and if they get surprise over the enemy, then they get to take an entire turn of kicking butt. And then the initiative rules being very much balanced for players to succeed more often than monsters succeed means that the players would get almost 2 rounds to steamroll the enemy before they had to worry about any kind of reprisals. By having surprise instead give disadvantage gives a clear advantage to the players to get that full turn first more often, but gives some occasional upsets and means that during that first round, the monsters do get to act. So there's at least some threat still left in the combat, some reason to crowd control instead of just breaking out every damaging option you could look at. And, it just changes the dynamic and makes it so that your encounters are a lot less likely to just be a complete slaughter or a potential TPK if you have dialed up the difficulty of your encounter so that one full round could mean that the monsters are slaughtering the players. That helps us to preserve the tension that an encounter might have, even in a situation where one side has such a high advantage. It wasn't necessarily a problem previously to preserve tension when the monsters had surprise over the players, but preserving tension when the players had the surprise was actually a bit of a challenge unless you had really tuned your fights up to 11. More importantly, though, by changing the surprise rules so that everybody gets to act in this first round, we no longer put any player that perhaps was less fortunate than others in being able to tell that the fight was coming into a sort of enforced timeout, making it far more likely for the DM who wants everybody to have fun at the table to be willing to use these surprise mechanics and not have to worry so much about, well, if I only surprise part of the group, then this guy has to sit out while everybody else gets to act, and it's going to take all this time before a certain person gets to have a turn and be able to do something fun. This ensures that in the space of an entire round, everybody still gets to act, meaning nobody gets stuck into timeout. It also allows us to have mixed groupings of surprised and not surprised a lot easier. One of the most annoying surprises that hasn't really worked out for me at my tables in trying to find a solid opportunity so that I don't feel like anybody is taking advantage is the sort of surprise where everybody's engaging in a conversation with a potential enemy and the danger level has sort of dropped down as people are talking amongst each other and both sides are sort of mutually getting along, and then one guy surprises everybody by pulling out the wand of fireballs and tossing the bead into the middle of the other group. This situation sets up a weird spot when you're trying to run it with the old rules, where the guy with the fireball is perhaps surprising everybody in that first round, but everybody else then would have to sit out while they waited for this guy to do his thing. The rules don't really support you resolving that action beforehand, especially if everybody is watching and nobody's actually surprised, and it becomes a real challenge to be able to figure out a way where it works for everybody, and you're not putting people in timeout, you're not overly just dismissing it, and you don't end up with a situation where this guy rolls for initiative with everybody else because he initiated the fight, but for some reason he's the guy who acts last because he has a low initiative modifier or just a crappy dice roll. Using the surprise rules in the new edition, we should be able to essentially just give everybody else disadvantage on their initiative checks and increase the odds that him drawing his wand is going to mean he gets to throw it first. And even if we apply that universally to both players and monsters on both sides of the field, it'll still feel okay because there might be somebody who's fast enough that as the wand is being drawn, they act. Or it might be that he manages to get it off as his first action, and then everybody else falls in right behind, and there's no he acts, and then we start into round 2, and we're waiting for reactions to roll around and all that kind of thing. Unfortunately, the one thing that I don't like about these surprise rules as they've been presented to us, at least, is that there's no mention of people being able to use their reactions during a surprise round in any unusual way. And personally, I really love the idea of the fighter blazing past the front line to get to the boss because he managed to get a surprise round, or he managed to get surprise against the enemy minions that are up front there. Because they're going to have access to their reactions in this new system, even if they have rolled really low on the initiative score, they're going to get to take opportunity attacks on that fighter as he tries to breeze past. And personally, I think that one doesn't quite fit the narrative as well as I would have liked. And if I was to make a suggestion or an update, it would be that reactions couldn't be used still until after your initiative had rolled up in a surprise round. But it might be more trouble than it's worth. Regardless, I'm excited for the new rules and to see what other little tweaks they might have made on the sly that we can look forward to in September when the 2024 Player's Handbook comes out. Maybe they'll have made some other changes to initiative, like my suggestions up here. Who knows? Regardless, thanks for watching, and happy adventuring.